this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure.
Welcome to this week's episode. This week I interviewed Argentinian storyteller Anabelle Castaño. She's been telling for quite a long time, and I met Anabelle through a feast mentorship, which I was really fortunate to be a part of this year. There were 5 of us who were mentees for the program, and I hope that I'll be able to interview the other mentees and the mentors during the course of this show. We talked a lot about the respect for the origins of story and the cultural value of doing the research, and I learned a lot from Anabelle, and I particularly enjoyed her tips, which are right at the very end. I hope you enjoy the interview. Here's Anabelle. Well, welcome to this episode of The Heart of Storytelling. My guest today is Anabelle Castaño, who is in Buenos Aires, and Anabelle is an archaeologist, and she speaks Spanish and English. Are there any more languages?
A little bit of Japanese, a little bit of French.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So tell me how you got your start in storytelling.
Well, it's been a while. I have been telling for around 18 years now at the moment. And actually I started telling stories to my nieces and nephews. So I started as a impromptu storyteller, and I used to tell stories at school too. In the breaks with my school friends, I would like invent stories or do what nowadays we would call crossovers of Little Red Riding Hood and the Seven Dwarfs, and I would change things and things like that. There was no young adult literature at the time, so I think that was the first experience. But professionally, I started telling stories at the museum I work at. I have been working for more than 18 years at a museum on anthropology, that is the Ethnographic Museum here in Buenos Aires. And I started telling Maori stories because we have an exhibition that has collections from all around the world that speaks of how anthropology museums came to be and how collections came to be. And well, I had been to New Zealand, and I had bought a book of folklore, of traditional folk tales from the Maori people, and there was this story in which there was this traditional gesture that the Maori do when they are facing an enemy or in defiance, when they're pulling their tongue out. And we have popo, which are wood carvings, and they are doing the same thing. So I remember that I said, oh, but I have found a story right now on this, and I asked permission to my boss if we could do something with it. And it was a way of bringing children and grown-ups, bring them more awareness of the culture of the Maori people and of the meanings behind the wood carvings, and at the same time, they would find something else about them besides hard data, and they loved the story, and that's how it started. So as you can see, I tell a lot of stories.
Yes. So I imagine that, when we think about history, it is quite analytical, I guess, and the story then gives it some heart, I suppose, does it? Or how do you view it in that way?
Well, on the one hand, I'm very careful on the cultural context of the story, not to misrespect or misrepresent anything on it. At the same time, I'm not Maori, so I remember that a few years later, I was at an archaeology congress in which there were Maori representatives, and I remember approaching them very, very scared and worried, and saying, "Look, I work at a museum, and I'm a storyteller, and I do this and that, and am I disrespecting you? And am I culturally appropriating the stories?" And I remember that they said, "Okay, tell us what you are telling." And they said, "No, no, it's okay, keep on. It's cool, if you're not telling stories that are very sacred or linked to one lineage, to one iwi, or some secret stories that unfortunately have been written down by white people." So that's how it started. But now I tell from many cultures, and I usually try to do that, respectfully find the link between these objects that the museum is custodian of, and the cultural stories and the voices of the people that the museum is, in a sense, representing through the objects.
Yeah.
So, and well, whether the issue of colonialism, that's something that also arises, and we also speak about it. So, in a
Mm.
way, it's also a teaching tool. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So when you say you uh, learn about it, what do you do to learn about the story and the object? Is there a process you go through?
Well, on the one hand, I research a lot about the cultures and what the objects are and what they do. But at the same time, I try to always link some part of the object to one of the stories. So I'm always looking for specific stories. I remember that, well, in the museum we have also a Japanese Buddhist altar, and it was something that the museum asked for in the 1910s. They contacted a Japanese importer. He actually was not linked to Buddhist religion or to altars, but he was the one that negotiated and asked for this altar to be made for the museum. And it's huge. And it has a representation of Buddha, Buddha Amitabha, in the center of the altar. And I remember that I said, okay, I'm going to research Japanese stories. And I started learning the language because I could not exactly understand the Japanese stories that I had. So I said, okay, I need some more understanding of the culture, because evidently I'm not, there's something like that I cannot find myself in when I'm, looking for these stories. And actually the language opened up the world of a little bit of the world, a glimpse of the world of Japan, not being Japanese. And and I remember that I eventually found many stories that I could link to the altar, and even stories that are not linked to the altar, but just they are both from the same country, so they in a sense try to represent a little bit more beyond that. But I also remember finding a story by, well, an English collector about a whale that goes to a very famous Japanese temple to face a very famous Buddha statue. And the whale goes on land to see whether she's bigger and larger than Buddha, than the statue, or Buddha is larger than her. And I loved it because I said, okay, here it is. This is one of the stories that it's impossible not to tell with this Buddhist altar next to me. So that kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so you said something about language, and I'm quite interested in this because I've recently done some research. And I was very aware that I didn't want to disrespect the culture that the story came from. But I
Yeah.
think there are, no matter how much we do, we're still going to miss the deeper levels of culture that are unspoken of. And how do you you look for motifs and symbolism when you're doing this, or what are you looking for in the story to help you get the depth?
Sometimes I'm looking for symbolism. Through the years, I think that I look for it more and more,
Yeah.
and and I detect it. Perhaps sometimes it's something unconscious, so I might pick the story and then find out that there's a whole symbolism going
Mm,
on with it, especially when it's not a folk tale, when it's a myth.
mm,
I'm very careful with myths because, unlike folk tales that have the ability to change through time, and they
mm,
have this um, way of being like permeable. I'm not sure if it's exactly the word in English, but
mm,
I'm thinking it in Spanish. It feeds on what's going on and on the storyteller's voice. Myths
mm,
are sacred stories, so you have to respect that. And through the years, I'm more and more aware and more wary
mm,
of some collections of myths. For instance, some myths that I used to tell. I might even tell them nowadays, but I'm more distrustful of the source if I don't know the source, or I'm more distrustful of how they paint a culture that is not its own, especially in the case of collections that are from the 19th century,
mm,
books that were picked by perhaps early ethnographers or
mm,
early travelers. So those are the ones that I'm more wary of now.
mm,
And one of the things is the symbolism issue, because I think that sometimes um, they have cut away a lot to make way to a way of reaching the audiences that are reading this,
mm.
especially if they are Western culture audiences. But it happens the same when I find things from like South America in the English speaking world.
Yeah.
Sometimes you find some things and you say, but wait, is it like that, or how was it collected?
Yeah.
So and also now and I think not only me as in my personal journey, but also specialists, folklorists, current people that are working on this are also more respectful of the voices of the storytellers that they hear
Mm,
and that they record stories from. You don't find these like generalized, it's an African tale or it's a Bantu tale, which is like, you're not saying anything about it. You're not telling me anything about who
mm,
is telling the what is the culture. Um, and so, I'm trying also to look for more current ways of approaching these stories. And then, of course, well, what happens when I find a story and then when I work with it, well, there's also a transformation. And in a way, I try not to misrepresent who I am. I'm not Japanese, I'm
mm,
not Maori or, indigenous of many nations here in my country or in other countries that, we are having
mm,
links with in the museum, for instance, or outside of it. Um, so I'm aware that I'm not of the culture. So I'm also, it's like they tell the story. It's, and this was collected by such and such
mm.
in,
Yeah.
so that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, try to find the most versions that I can
Sounds like
and
you have a
variants.
similar process. Yeah, I'm very much the same, finding lots of different versions so I can maybe get to the heart of the story and the truth of the story, particularly. So you tell a lot of folk tale and you tell fairy tale as well, or just folk tale?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I do love fairy tales. and and actually this was something that I had a conversation with this year, this in 2023, with the people from the Yorkshire Festival of Stories. I was speaking with one of the participants of a workshop that I
That was so
gave.
great. I watched the replays. It was amazing. Yeah.
Oh, how
Yeah.
great. I'm
Yeah.
happy. I'm so happy. So, I met with her through Zoom and we were speaking about some of these things. And one of the issues that arose was that folktale and fairy tale is not the same in Spanish translated in folklorist terms, because fairy tale in English is what we might call in Spanish wonder tale. And this is something that we are not even aware of in Spanish unless you're speaking or working with folklore, in a deep way or as an expert. So we usually translate it as cuento de hadas, like fairy tale, which would
Mm,
be in Spanish, or contes de fées, which is in French. I'm mispronouncing it, so sorry about
that's
that.
okay.
Uh, but um, but actually, we're speaking about wonder tales, which can be not only, they not only have fairies, but they have magic elements and everything. And yeah, I do love those, and I do love telling those. So they're a big part of my repertoire too when I can.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
amazing. So
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's like asking your favorite child,
Mm.
but do you have a couple of stories that you really love telling?
Oh, yes. I do, I do. And it's very difficult. It's like you say, who's your favorite child?
Yeah.
Um, okay, so through the years, I have had like big favorites that they have changed, and at the same time, they still keep the same in a sense, So I have the big bag of children behind me, or surrounding me. I would say one of my most favorite tales is The Talking Bird, which has other titles. It's found in the 1001 Nights, but also in other folktale traditions, which is the story of two brothers, a sister that are you have like this young girl that marries a sultan, and she gives birth to these three children, and her envious sisters throw them to the river, and they are adopted by another couple, and things happen in the middle. And at one point, when they are grown up and they are owners of their own, house and land, and it's a beautiful place, someone tells them, "Oh, but this would be more beautiful if you find the talking bird, the singing tree with golden leaves, and the golden water," which they are very famous, and you have recognized
Yes.
it. So they go on the search of this one by one, and she's the one that gets them. And I'm not spoiling anything here. But well, that is, I think, one of my most favorite stories, and I think it's because my mom told it to me. We used to have, I still have them. That's why I'm pointing towards my library, one of my libraries inside my house. But we had a collection of books that were like huge with beautiful illustrations that they sold when my mom was a child here, and they sold them in the newspaper posts, and you would buy them weekly. So you would buy like one fascicle of each,
Wow.
and you would have like 10 tomes of stories, beautifully illustrated, and this book and this story was inside it. So then I looked it up in the 1001 Nights, and then I looked it up in other versions and variants, and I still love it, and I think it's one of my most favorite.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, I do love long stories, as you
Yes.
can see, because I don't have short answers. Uh,
Yes.
no, no, but I do love also short stories, and I do tell them a lot too. And some of them from Mexico, some of them from Argentina, some of them from Japan.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of my current favorite stories is, well, you have heard it, East of the Sun, West of the Moon.
Yes, I love that
Uh,
story. Yeah.
yeah, I think I have it among my top favorite in the last 5 years.
And it's a
So
long one too.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So yeah, those are, and as you can see, I love many wonder tales.
Yes.
They're among my top.
Yeah. So I was talking with the first interviewee the other day. We were talking Jo Henwood, and she was saying how Australian audiences can only listen to a story for about 10 minutes. In South
Wow.
America, what's your take on that? Like, is there a bit the audience is a bit more open?
Mm, It depends. I'm sorry. You might hear a sound. I'm not sure if they're going to watch video in the podcast or just sound. So you might hear me swallowing. I apologize for that, but I'm drinking mate tea, which is very typical here, and it's the morning over here. So it's part of my impossible not to have it in the morning and be awake during an
No,
interview.
you're
So that's
fine.
why.
You're fine.
So I hope you don't hear a lot of sound effects from me doing that.
All good.
So as you were saying, well, lovely, Joe. I think it depends on the audience. We have for an audience that is used to tales, I think a 10 or 15-minute tale would be like, yeah,
Mm.
one of the limits. Although I'm known to have told longer and kept most of the audience's attention. I'm not sure if the whole audience, I would not say that. I would not brag about it because it's impossible. And I think that depends on the age and, as I tell you, as how they are used to listening to stories.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes, and I think in that sense, more traditional audiences, in the sense of people that have grown up with stories or with
Mm.
oral traditions, they are ready to listen and to stay more listening to a story. Um, but I have done the same with guided tours. I'm, this abusive guided tour guide inside the museum that can do a 90-minute tour if, people are passionate about it and, engaged. And they ask me questions, so it can lengthen to that, which is horrible because, I get exhausted and people get exhausted at the same time. And I usually don't lose audiences. So depending on how you tell it and what you're sharing and what you're doing, you might keep the attention of the people.
Mm.
And at the same time, it's not something that I recommend. I'm trying to cut.
I think 90 minutes would be way beyond my capabilities, I think.
No, yeah, it's a lot, but in that case, if it might be a guided tour in which we're doing one kind of like activity, or I'm sharing images, or we're
Mm.
touching objects, or we might be doing more things, so it's a part of an experience, so it might
Mm.
be like it's quite different.
So
And but
it's sort of immersive then, isn't it? If you're
Mhm.
telling a story, but you're also looking at objects and you're going on a journey, really, aren't you, through the museum?
Yeah, in a sense you are, and of course, the reactions might be different. I have a storyteller colleague whose husband has always accompanied her to anything that she goes to, and she goes to listen to a lot of stories. And he, ineffectually, I'm not sure if it's a correct word, but I will use it anyway. I'm sticking to my guns here. But he falls asleep every time I start telling a story. So I have that effect on him, for instance, and I'm very used to it, and he's very used to storytellers. His wife is one.
Yeah.
But and at one point he said, "Oh, I apologize," and I said, "No, no, no, it's okay. I think I'm relaxing to you, so it's
Yeah.
cool." But yeah, he can never, help himself, and he falls asleep. So I'm not so successful necessarily.
I think that's a fair. I mean, when we listen to stories when we're little, it's usually at bedtime and we fall asleep either during
Yeah,
or after. So there is that
yeah,
association with sleep with that. So this podcast project is called The Heart of Storytelling. So
yes.
what do you think is at the heart of storytelling? Why do we still need oral story tradition in the modern world?
Well, I think we are story. We are made of stories. So if we stop listening to stories, in a sense, we stop being who we are as culture, as people, as a species. I think there's uh, there's a book that I'm trying to find and buy because the title attracts me. It's called Homo narrans, which would be like Homo sapiens, but in this
Oh,
case, it's like
yes.
Homo narrans, as in the storytelling human.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that title attracted me because I said, okay, yes, that's what we are. There's this very famous, not only here in South America, but in other countries, he's very well known Uruguayan poet and writer called Eduardo Galeano. And he has some very, very short stories that are very poetic. And he says, a little bird told me that we're not made of atoms, that actually we are made of stories, and he picked up something that many people say, but at the same time it became something that the common sense says, and actually he wrote it down like 40 years ago. And I think he's very right. Stories not only are who we are and how we tell ourselves, as in, how we can follow our past and our dreams into the future, and how we build the present.
Mm.
but at the same time, they are a way of giving us hope that the weak can defeat the strong, and that the injustice can be turned around, and gives us tools of inspiration, perhaps, on that. Or at the same time of thinking that no matter what the situation, these too shall pass. And this is something that stories give us. So, in a sense, I think they are tools of hope and of identity. So, yeah, I would say that that's one of the things. And the other, I have been learning this in the last years, is listening. I think we need to train ourselves more to listen, not only to what the person in front of us is telling, but more deeply to what everything is telling us. I'm not sure if I'm putting it right into words,
No,
but
yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
So it understanding the resonance, I guess, of what the person's it's hard to put into words. You are right, that is hard. um yeah, what's not being said is really powerful too. I think you're
Yeah.
right about the listening, I think, and Australians can only listen to 10-minute stories. We're in a bit of trouble in Australia.
Well, I think we are in trouble in the world right
Yeah,
now. But right now, I mean, not only with the current present situation in terms of environment, in terms of military conflict, in terms
yeah.
of human rights issues going on everywhere,
Mm.
but also in terms of the we are pushed as people, consumers, to not think and not stop, and produce, or consume. And
Mm.
what does a story ask you? To stop and listen and take a quiet breath, and while you're listening, to imagine and to make your brain work in other ways. So I would say that that's also something that stories might bring us. And if we are having audiences that are having trouble with that, well, I think it's a mark of the times. But I think it's something that every generation says. It's
You're
it's a
probably
mark
right.
of the, so we keep on trying. Um, and uh, and a few years ago, I think it was Walter Benjamin. He was saying, it's the death of the storyteller. Stories are not told. And he was speaking and writing this at a time in which the world was in a very, very dark place, in one of its darkest times. And at the same time, the stories are still alive. He brings a dark view of what's going on, and at the same time he shines a light of hope at the end of this essay that he writes on the storyteller. But I think stories still try to keep alive, and yeah, and that brings me off a story to a story, but
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to the story now.
And this is not a folk tale or from oral tradition, but it's written by a storyteller. And let me tell you a little bit of him first, because I have to give credit, when credit is due. His name is Nicolás Buenaventura Vidal. He is a Colombian storyteller, but he's also French. His mother is French, so he lives in France right now. And he's one of the most, I think he's one of the best storytellers in the Spanish speaking world. And he's a very, very sensitive and deep man. He really knows what is listening, I think. And I admire his work a lot. And I remember that I found this story that he wrote down in a book called Cuando el hombre es su palabra, when man, or humanity, humans, are their word. That's what he does, a lot of wordplay too. And he has this story that says that at one point the world was completely dark. The clouds started covering the skies, the thunder was listened, the earth was shaking, and the people in the tribe joined together and they told a story. And when they told the story next to the fire in the circle, listening deeply, the world quieted, and the thunder and the clouds rolled around, and the sky became clear again. And a time later, again, the clouds covered the sky and the world started shaking, and the people in the village joined together. And they started telling the story, but they did not remember exactly the whole thing. And they had the fire, and they had the circle, and they had the meeting. And what they told was right. And the clouds rolled around, and the sky came clear again, and the world stopped shaking. And a time later, the clouds started rolling again, and the people, joined together in the city. And you know, they had forgotten how to make the fire, or they did not need the fire at the time, but they had the circle, and they tried to tell the story or what they remembered of it. And the world stopped shaking, and the clouds rolled, and the sky was clear again. And nowadays, a few years ago, the clouds started rolling in, and the clouds, darkened, and the skies were deep and threatening. And this young girl, she went to the middle of a park, and she looked around her, and she said, I don't know how to make the fire, and I don't know how to get the circle, and I don't know exactly the story, but I can tell you that this story existed, and I can tell it that way. And she told it as what she knew, and what she knew of what had happened before. And the world stopped shaking, and the clouds started rolling, and the sky came clear again. And I think that's something very important that Nico tried to tell us, of what happens with the power of stories. You might not remember the exact story, but you might remember either the meaning or the circle or the meeting or some sense of it, and make a new story of it. And perhaps the world would stop shaking a little bit for a while. So that's why that's why your question of what is the heart of the story, I think, in a sense, he tries to explore it in this story, which is actually longer, but from what I can remember and from what I can translate into English, it's the bare bones of it. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's it.
but there's also that element of the fire. There's something about a
Yeah,
fire when people sit around a fire.
yeah,
People are mesmerized in that moment, but also that story has community, and we
yeah,
talked about this with Joe. The idea of belonging within
yeah.
that space of story.
Hmm.
And I guess you're right, and he's right. The story itself doesn't matter so much. It's everything else. Yeah, that's beautiful. I really love that. So,
Well, I did not did not do justice to the whole story, because it's like what happens with Galeano. They have a way with words that are very poetic in a sense. And but well, that's why I shared the spirit of it, and not exactly. I'm like the girl, I'm in the middle of the park, and I'm saying, okay, I don't have the story with me right now, but I can say it
look,
this way.
I think if we're talking about translation from anything, I think it loses
Mhm.
something anyway.
Oh yes, oh
So,
yes.
I mean, my rudimentary French, I know, I know that when you're translating, it's not quite the same, and you can't quite capture the essence of things. You can do your best, you
Yeah.
can. So do you have
That's right.
a special memory or a moment in the storytelling where you went, "Oh my, that was the best time ever," or it was
Oh,
poignant or
no.
something?
Well, I have some favorite memories. I'm not sure if I would say, this was the best time ever. I think every time I feel that the heartbeat of the audience or the breathing of the audience is going at the same time as me, that for me is the best time ever. And But it's not only the audience, because in a sense it's like them and me, or them and us, and it's not that division. It's actually all of us together, because they built the story with us, or we build it together in a sense. Even through that breathing and that silent listening. Um, but I have some very good memories with telling with children, two children. I do a lot of storytelling for children in the museum and also sometimes outside of it. And they are a very frank audience. And sometimes it's wonderful to see their faces and their reactions. And I think one of the best memories that I have is about, I was doing a selection of stories, let's call it a show on stories about death and the origins of death. Because I'm very happy like that, I'm a happy character. No, but death has all
Oh,
its
I love death stories. Very good.
Okay, that's cool. And we were doing it for Day of the Dead, which even if it's more famous in Mexico and here in Argentina, there is a tradition in the northwest of Argentina, in the Andean area, where the Andes mountain range is, in which people do celebrate the Day of the Dead to not exactly the same as in Mexico with the calaveritas, like in Coco, the movie, but you have some very beautiful traditions and a very strong feeling of connecting with the people that have been. And I remember that I prepared a selection of stories that became this show called "The Origins of Death and Other Tales," and it's a trip through different countries and cultures and how death came to be. And sometimes it's a very beautiful and helpful death that even teaches us to have sex or laugh.
Mm.
And sometimes, it's like a silly death that it's defeated or, tricked by someone. And sometimes, tricking her works in our favor, and most of the times it doesn't. But I remember I was telling a story of Tibetan origin in which, death is tricked by an old man, and she's locked away for many years. And, they call Vishnu, and he comes down, so it has also in Indian origins. And Vishnu finds eventually death, and but it's not Vishnu and Yama, which would be like more in the Indian folktale tradition, at least not the version that I found. But anyway, death says, okay, I won't be tricked anymore. I have to become invisible in the eyes of the world. So it's an explanation of why we don't see death, actually. And I remember that I finished telling this story, and it was not for children. It was actually for teenagers or grown-up audiences, or if there was a young audience presence, they had to be with their parents. And there was this young boy. He was around 8 or 10 years old, and I finished, and and he said, at the moment I finished telling that story, he said, wait, but uh but then grandfather. And he turns around and looks at his parents, and that's the only thing that he says, because I think he understood what happened to his grandfather through the story that I told. And this is something that I tell to my students when I'm teaching storytelling, and I say, okay, well, if this happens, you have to address it in a way. And my address was, yeah, but grandfather. And I did not say anything else. And and they said, well, but you did not say anything else to him. No, it was not needed. The story did everything for me. I don't need to say anything else. I just picked what he said. I recognized that he found something else there, and and I let the silence work, because I was telling another story, so I was bringing another way of seeing death. And I'm not sure what happened to him and his parents in terms of of that, but I thought that it was enlightening how stories work, and how we as storytellers, in a sense, are ways of bringing this. And I love telling funny stories and silly stories, but I think that any story can become deep if you find the right ear. And this story found the right ear. So
No,
you
that's wonderful. Yeah.
yeah.
So you said you teach other storytellers. Tell me about that.
Oh, well, I do teach workshops, and sometimes I do seminars, or sometimes I accompany professionally well, similar to the mentorship that we did with Feast,
Yeah.
some storytellers in their professional journey. I usually teach more repertoire. I do a lot of research on different kind of folk tales and folklore from all around the world. So some storytellers, they took workshops with me to learn a little bit more of, some specific region of the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
and found out more. In English, for instance, I have taught workshops and seminars on stories from South America, especially from, Argentina, Chile,
Yeah.
Bolivia, and Uruguay, Paraguay. So we do a lot of that. But also when I'm, accompanying storytellers in terms of how they tell, um, I'm mostly working on these, not so much on their style. I might, suggest some ways of finding their own voice, of course, a
Mm.
personal way of telling, but yes, to take into account these kind of listening to the audience, working with them, it's always something that you, as I was telling you, you don't tell by yourself. You're telling through everything, not only how you stand or sit or face the audience, but also when you're interacting with the audience. And I love to interact, so also sometimes they ask me, "Okay, how to do it," and then, well, you have different ways,
Yes.
uh, which not necessarily something that happens when you're doing a Zoom, because of course it's quite different, but I believe telling digitally also is a way of a new way of storytelling, and it can be as effective as telling in person, even if we don't necessarily can see the full reaction. I won't have the boy saying, but
Mm.
grandfather, but it might happen to him at his home
Oh,
while I'm.
without question, I saw during COVID, I saw Rebecca Lemire tell a story about
Mhm.
death, and
Yes.
that story sat with me for weeks until I started doing some research, found out about it, and that was one of the first stories that I told that I felt through my whole body, like it sat in me. I mean, it
Yeah.
was beautiful. So yeah, the stories do resonate in the visual form, I think you're right.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
just to wrap up our interview today, um, can you give me some advice for emerging and beginner storytellers for people just like me?
Well, I think you are a good storyteller, so not a beginner, but okay.
Thank
Let's.
you.
What can I say? Tell a lot, but listen more.
Wow.
Listen, go and listen to other people and listen to stories, and try to see what happens. Listen with your eyes and with your ears and with your whole body. It's a good way of learning. And I would say try to find, don't keep the only version that resonates with you, like
Mhm.
what you're doing. Try to find all the versions and variants of a
Mhm.
story. And it's a way also of delving into this beautiful world. And don't be afraid to fail. Actually, having big failures are big doors to grow more. For me, the first big failure that I had as a storyteller was telling Japanese tales, and that led me to learning Japanese and learning other Japanese stories and deepening my way of facing them, because it was not the same learning one kind of culture and story and doing the same with others. And uh and yes, be respectful of the source and the origins of the story, of the people that tell it, because these stories are living beings. And last but not least, but this is something that I tell also to museum guides when I when I'm working with museum educators. I would say that no matter what you want people to hear or to listen to, people will have their own listening, and they will hear whatever they want to. And especially in these times, so be very clear on what you want to communicate, but at the same time be aware that what the other person is building might be very different from what you're telling. So that's one other thing.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you. That's really good advice for me moving forward. Thank you. And hopefully other storytellers who are listening will got a lot of that as well. So
Well, I'm happy.
how can people find you if they want to find out more about you and what you do?
Well, I have a web page and I have an email if you want to contact me. I love, finding out about people that are finding me out, and if they have questions or if they want to either take a workshop or know what I'm doing. My web page is www.anna, Anna Cas, because it's Anabelle Castaño, dot ar from Argentina. So that's my web address, and it's in English and in Spanish. So you will find like my agenda in Spanish, which is larger, of course, and also some of my work in English. And my email is Anabelle, which is not like Annabelle Lee, but it's Anna with one N, Belle, Belle, Annabelle, .cas @gmail.com. So you can send me an email through there or get into my webpage and you'll find my email too. And I used to have a mailing list, but I'm a failure at sending regular emails. So, if you want to, you can send me, a message and I'll answer, but I'm not very good at keeping, I have a lot of people that I admire that send you regularly, like email. No, forget about it.
It's not
I
you.
can do that for 6 months and then forget about it. And then, 5 months later, I appear again and I say, hi, and not working.
All right. Well, I'll put your details in the information box on the podcast. But thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alyssa, and congratulations on the podcast. And well, I hope to listen more about this podcast and about your travels and your storytelling journey.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.